Hello, I'm Llewellyn King, the host of MECFS Alert. My guest today is Mary Dimmock, a very special friend and a very special person in the struggle to bring a cure and justice to the ME dilemma, to the ME disease, to the ME need for greater research. Mary, welcome to the broadcast. Lovely to see you. You have been working since your son became sick, right? You've been working as an advocate.
My son became sick in 2010, and at first with ME, and at first we were just trying to figure out what he had. I went to my first meeting in 2011, and I've been active since then.
And how is your son doing?
He's better than he was at his worst. At his worst, he was only able to get out of bed for about a half an hour a day, just enough to go to the bathroom and get some food. But now he's been on a drug called Rituxan, which we've been able to get as a private patient. It's not approved for his disease, but we've been able to access. And it's helped him, but he's still pretty disabled.
Rituxan is one of two that I've heard a lot over these 5 years.
Right,
The other one is Ampligen.
Right.
And yet, in that 5 years, neither has been approved for general use.
No.
Ampligen is still a research drug, and Rituxan is a cancer drug used off-label, as they say in the medical business, for ME. What's happening? Is there any progress being made to make these things generally available and affordable?
Right. Well, so starting Rituxan is also used for rheumatoid arthritis as well. A few patients have been able to get it, but it's very expensive. First-year treatment can be as much as $60,000. 60.
60,000.
Right. And so that's out of reach for most patients. And plus, you have to find a doctor who's willing to do it. Ampligen, on the other hand, is not approved at all. So you have to be at one of the treatment centers. It costs currently, I think, about $20,000. They had proposed that the manufacturer proposed raising the price, but right now I think it's still around $20,000. But with that drug, you have to go to one of the few treatment centers across the whole country. And you have to basically relocate because you have to get an infusion twice a week.
So that people do, in fact, move. We know, for example, there's one out at Incline Village. There's a center in Nevada, and I know at least one person who's moved, no, several, because I went out there and interviewed, who have moved there specifically so they can get the drug, which keeps them ambulatory. Without it, they're bedridden.
Right. So as far as getting more clinical trials going, though, I think the problem that we have faced is that there is no money for research, so there's been very little money outside of the field of, let me back up a minute, the Institute of Medicine, the U.S. Institute of Medicine issued a report in 2015 on this disease, and they said that there has been very little research outside of the fields of psychiatry. And so we don't have a lot of researchers from major academic institutes involved. We have no clinical trials outside of the one that's been done for hemispherics in this country, at least very few.
Hemispherics was for Ampligen.
Right.
And it wasn't approved. Was there a reason?
It was not approved.
The deficiencies in the trial, was that it?
They wanted additional proof of efficacy. They felt that Ampligen, the submission, was not able to demonstrate effectiveness of the drug. And I think the other thing that Ampligen faced is that the definition of how this disease is defined is so broad that it would be very hard to say who Ampligen would actually help, because the definition of the disease could encompass many, many people for whom Ampligen would not be appropriate.
Let's talk about the definition of the disease, which is very hard to do because there's no easy biomarker. You can't go to the doctor, he draws some blood or she draws some blood, and bingo, you've got this disease. And we haven't gotten much better at defining it, have we?
Well, so the definition is a swamp. There's no better way to describe it. There are many definitions. There are 20 definitions, and some of them only require that a patient have chronic fatigue and can have a mental illness, and others require that patients have a very specific criteria and symptoms, one especially called post-exertional malaise, in which a patient, even after trivial exercise, can relapse or crash for a couple days and have a flare of all of their symptoms. And it's that symptom which is really the hallmark of the disease. So we have a circumstance where some definitions don't even recognize it or consider it important, and other definitions you have to have it. And along with that, there's evidence of neurological, immunological, and energy production impairment. Now, the Institute of Medicine did issue a report where in 2015, their report showed that there was, they did an evidence review and showed substantial neurological and immunological issues. And they also issued criteria which recognized this symptom. In addition, there are criteria that have been produced by experts, which are used right now more in research, and they also recognize this one symptom.
Well, there hasn't been much money and no huge
No.
research effort. There has been research, and there is
Right.
research ongoing. It's been mentioned, some of it on this broadcast in past
Right.
episodes, work at Columbia
Right.
University in New York, or the medical center, the Mailman Medical Center, and at Mount Sinai in New York, at Stanford, and out in Mountain View, California, and Andres Kogelman, a researcher there. Is this leading to anything? Are we getting further forward? Do we know something today we did not know 5 years ago?
So there have been some interesting findings on neuroinflammation, some interesting findings looking at the profile of patients' immune system, which they say can change from an early patient to a later patient. Rituxan, the study that has looked at Rituxan, has certainly been interesting because it's suggested an autoimmune aspect to the disease. And so and studies in energy production that patients have, I think quite a bit is known. I think what has been missing is the funding. Number one, the funding to be able to support validating those studies, demonstrating a biomarker, being able to clarify the definition. Now, the funding from the NIH has been, over the last 30 years or so, they have spent about $145 million. But that's 30 years. It's on average about $5 million a year or so.
Which,
I think
by government spending, is very,
it's
very
very
tiny.
low. I don't remember the exact number, but it's roughly number 130 out of 135 diseases. It's at the bottom of the bucket. Another way of thinking about it is it's only about $2 to $5 a patient in terms of what's being spent. It's not enough to fund research at a major academic center.
And something else which I've always been interested in, if there isn't enough money and there aren't enough continuing programs, you don't attract talent.
Right.
Researchers are a talent finite set of the population.
Right. So we have been in this hole where we don't know enough about the disease, and there's not enough money, and so no researchers are investigating the disease, and so we don't know enough about the disease, and we're in a vicious cycle there. As a result of another report that was produced in 2015 from NIH, NIH has made some substantial commitments all the way up to Dr. Collins.
That's the National Institutes of Health.
Yes.
Part of the Department of Health and Human Services.
Part of the department, one of the major agencies within the Department of Health and Human Services. NIH has made a commitment to, a significant commitment on the part of Dr. Collins to do something about this disease. He's the director of the NIH. So what we've seen from them is some initial steps and some communication that they're going to do more. They have set up an intramural study with 40 patients as well as some comparison groups. They have also reinstituted the trans NIH, a working group that they have to help plan for this disease, and the director of the National Institute of Neurological Diseases has made a major commitment to it. They've also had a teleconference, the first teleconference with patients to explain what they're thinking about and where they're going. And I think we all expect that more will be coming in May, but we don't know what it is. I will say, you know, there are concerns, obviously. The first one is the speed. Patients have been sick for many, many years. This report, the meeting for this report was held in December of 2015, so now we're a year and a half later. Many of the recommendations have been made for years, so it's a slow process. And yet for NIH, it's gone pretty quickly since October when they made their first announcement, but we need it to go faster. I think a second concern is a concern that this we don't see a lot of experts and patients being able to get a chance to provide input into what's being done. And I think related to that, there have been some missteps where they have initially broadcast that they were going to use a particular criteria or definition for the disease, which has been discredited in the past. It's not clear how they're going to run certain parts of the studies. They have changed their specification for the protocol along the way. So there have been some missteps. Another big concern that the patients have is the people that are guiding the study at the NIH. A couple of them have recommended cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and graded exercise therapy, and GET, for these patients, or else they have viewed the disease as a
These two are red rags to many patients. Yeah. I mean, the fury that mentioning those two approaches to the disease is incredible. Because as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, there is a feeling that if you take that route, one, it doesn't work, two, it can exacerbate the immediate suffering of a patient, and three, it is sometimes being done for really suspect motives, because if you can treat this disease as a psychological disease, not as a somatic one, then you don't have to pay as much. It's not as expensive. Psychiatrists are cheap. They come by the hour. Research is expensive, and it takes decades.
It certainly is a red flag. And the other issue, red flag within what NIH has done, is some of the leaders have, or one of the leaders at least in the past, has described the disease, related the disease to a somatoform illness. Now, both of those are coming from the claim that it's a somatoform illness in a general sense, and also CBT and GET, are coming from a school of thought that this is a psychological disease. And the research that's been done for CBT and GET, the assumption is patients aren't really sick, they just think they are. And because they think they're sick, they're afraid of being active, and they've gotten deconditioned. And you treat them with talk therapy and exercise to get them reconditioned. Well, clearly the disease is not a problem of deconditioning. But we've spent 30 years with this being the dominant paradigm. And so the opportunity that we have right now is to shift that dominant paradigm and to get rid of that research. But it's been a real struggle. Even today, in clinical guidelines that exist, Up to Date is the name of one clinical guideline provider. And they have provided new clinical guidelines since the IOM report, where they recommend the IOM criteria for diagnosis, which requires that patients have this systemic intolerance to exertion. But then they recommend that patients should be treated with CBT and GET.
Who is this? Where's this recommendation coming from?
This is in clinical guidelines that doctors use.
But who made this recommendation?
Up to Date is the name of the organization that produces.
Up to Date?
Up to Date. Up to Date.
And what is that?
It's a clinical guidelines provider.
And there are such things?
Yes.
Are they public, private?
Yeah. Well, you can buy this one, and doctors can have subscriptions to it. Some of them are on the web. It's very common to go out and look at clinical guidelines on the web. Mayo Clinic recommends CBT and GET. CDC has a recommendation for CBT and GET on their guidelines.
So they're very reputable people are recommending something that doesn't work.
They're very reputable.
And may be counterproductive.
Right. That could be not only counterproductive, but harmful. And so the place where we're at right now is the clinical establishment, the medical providers of clinical guidelines, are recommending treatments that could actually be harmful to patients based on science that was bad to begin with. And we need to break out of that. We haven't been able to break out of that yet. But that's one of the biggest challenges we face right now, as we continue to see recommendations within the medical community to use treatments that are based on the idea that this is a psychological illness.
May 12th is an important date in this community. Why is it May 12th? And what happens or did happen or should happen on that date?
Well, so it's intended to bring awareness to the disease. It is Florence Nightingale's birthday. Florence Nightingale is assumed to have had this disease. And so it's a way for the patient community to bring awareness to it. And different things happen across the world. Some communities have shown colored lights on that day, or some countries you've seen displays of colored lights, proclamations from a government body observing that day, demonstrations, various ways that people express it.
And what is happening in America? Anything special this year?
I understand there's going to be a protest at Health and Human Services, and there will also, in Washington, and there will also be...
Is there some website where people can go to find out about this?
I don't know that there is right now. I'm not sure that it's been set up yet. I'm sure there will be at some point.
So that if you're active in the community and looking at the many websites and the many sites on YouTube, not YouTube, this is on YouTube, but on Facebook, you will find out what is happening on May 12th.
Right, right.
Last year we tried to do a walkthrough in Congress and only 2 people showed up.
Right, right. If you go to ME Action, that's a website where a lot of news about the community.
ME Action.
Right, ME Action, you'll find it. So I want to come back to NIH though. I honestly think that NIH is trying, but we're in a huge hole because of what's been happened to this disease over many years. And we have some researchers involved, but not enough. We really don't have enough funds. We really need a set of investments that are going to change the way that this whole disease has been investigated and to encourage academic institutes to come to the table. And I think that NIH is committed to doing that, but I want to see what they're actually going to do. And so we're looking forward in May at some point to hear what else they are planning.
Almost alone among major diseases, ME does not have a presence in Washington. It doesn't have an association. It cannot turn out people easily.
Right.
And there is no central place that people can go to find out doctors in their neighborhoods, support groups in their neighborhoods.
No.
I get telephone calls, because I've done a lot of these broadcasts, from people who think they have it, and I'm not able to refer them anywhere.
Right, right. That's a big hole these days. There's very little money in the community. There's one organization that's really what I would call a national organization, but because of funding, they're rightly very focused on research.
And that is ME Action?
ME Action is a small grassroots organization. The other one I was thinking of is Solve ME-CFS Initiative.
That's right.
And they are focused on research, trying to get research going. Is where their current focus is.
But patient care, what the church would call pastoral work, is absent or very scattered.
Patient care right now is a real problem. Not only because...
I hear horror stories about people sleeping in cars, people who are destitute, they have this disease. It has no visible signs except they're sick. Their families don't believe they're sick. They believe they're malingering. There's terrible social problem with the disease.
Well, and I think it's really important to point out that it's not just the families that think they're sick. One of the things the Institute of Medicine was really clear on is that the medical community generally does not believe in this disease. It can treat patients with hostility. Patients can be branded as lazy and deconditioned and disability seeking. And so they face a medical community that either doesn't believe they're really sick or else thinks they should be treated with CBT and GET. So clinical care in this country is really bad for these patients. And doctors haven't been educated about the disease properly. And as we talked about before, a lot of the medical clinical guidelines that are out there are bad. So I think one of the things that we need HHS to do, NIH and HHS, we really need to establish some centers of excellence, if you will, treatment centers, along with research components that can help to jumpstart this disease by bringing a place for, or providing a place where patients can go to a center that really understands the disease. And that center can also provide information out to doctors out in the communities that are trying to treat these patients. But at the same time, the centers would also be doing research into the disease, and that could really help to get both research and clinical care for these patients going.
You've told a tale in which the government has been derelict in its duty, derelict in its efforts.
Right.
But where are the other institutions that affect things, like the foundations? The foundations pour millions and millions and millions of dollars into various projects. If they poured some money into this disease, some of that infrastructure, which is missing, if you were to build up the infrastructure, you would influence the government. And you don't have the infrastructure.
Right. And it's a real chicken and egg. When you have a disease that people don't even believe is real, when you have a disease where there's an interesting story by one of the researchers who said that he was told by his mentor to not go into this disease because he would end up homeless, because he could not get funding. And so when you have an ecosystem, if you will, where the doctors don't believe the disease is real, the families don't believe the disease is real, and research, there's no funding for research, and the major academic centers are just ignoring the disease or neglecting the disease, it's very hard to convince any foundation that they should put money into it. And the same with pharma. Pharma is not going to invest in something.
Pharma is the
pharmaceutical companies.
The term we use to describe them collectively.
Right. It's very hard. It would be very hard for any of them to really get interested and involved in it because it's been so nebulous and so hard to understand what's going on. I really do think that's changing, but it's going to take, because it's so pervasive, the narrative is so pervasive about this thing being a psychological problem, that it's going to take a set of coordinated actions to really get that to change.
Is anybody trying to seed those coordinated actions?
So, for one, I think NIH is trying. They have talked about a plan for short-term, both short-term and long-term work or programs that they could do. They also talked about fertilizing research. Will it be enough? We'll have to wait and see what they come up with. As far as the local community, as far as the community itself, there have been some efforts to raise funds for research and also to pull together a consortium of researchers to really investigate this disease. One is the End MECFS project out of California. Ron Davis is the head of that program, and Ron's son at Whitney Defoe is very, very ill with this disease. He's one of the sickest patients I've seen. And Ron is working with a woman, Linda Tannenbaum, who is helping to raise significant funds. And that will provide, that they are pursuing some research that I think will make a real difference in this disease. They're looking at very severely ill patients who have a fairly, the expectation is because they're so sick, there will be a significant size of signal to what's going on with these patients. And so there are some pockets, if you will, where some private funding has helped to get some significant research going over the last 5 years, 4 years or so. And I would think some of the most important research that's been done in that amount of time has been done through families who have donated some money, private foundations who are trying to raise money. But it's a struggle to get that money.
Mary Dimmock, you are a brilliant and articulate advocate.
Thank you.
The community is lucky to have you.
Thank you.